So anyways, the name of my presentation is called The Ugly Americans, and as I was telling him before, the reason it's called The Ugly Americans is that I was actually here in
Sarajevo
5 years ago, and before I came, my boss said, listen, be nice to these guys, don't be the ugly American in the room, listen to what they're saying, because, we're trying to actually make this product actually be successful. So that's how I came with the name Ugly Americans. There's not any type of other reason behind it. Thank you again to all of our sponsors. So, I know when you guys think about America, we think about these guys, right? You think about a place that's full of obesity, right? Look at me. A place where everybody has a bunch of guns and big trucks, right? Let me ask you, show of hands, how many folks in here have are on some sort of distributed team? You have either a stakeholder, or you have a team member, or somebody who's in a different country? Just show of hands. All right. How many? Keep your hands up, though. How many of those people are in? Those stakeholders are in the United States? Just out of curiosity. Okay, we got a good amount of people. Okay, cool. So luckily, we as Americans are a little bit more deeper and profound than some of these folks on this slide. Anyways, this is my history right here. I've been in this game for almost 16 years. Of those 16 years. Been with 9 companies, so I am I like to say I'm the oldest millennial, so obviously I've job hopped a little bit over these last few years. I've worked with people on an Agile team that have been in over 16 countries. Attempted 12 products, really only successful with 10 of them, so 90%, 80%, something like that. I feel like that's a pretty good rate. The funny thing about my experience is that I've had a lot of what you call startup experience, as well as been with a lot of what I call old school enterprise companies. And one of the great things is, as you can see, is you can see Bosnia here, you can see Sarajevo, you can see India, you can see China. Worked with all sorts of different countries. And that's a great thing I love about the folks here in Sarajevo is that the culture here and the work ethic and the creativity of the workforce here is amazing. So, let's go ahead and jump into it as well. So, really, when I look at, I didn't realize I had all this animation, so please bear with me. So, when I look at kind of what are the 4 things that are going to make distributed Agile teams successful, really the first thing is making sure that everybody has a high-level understanding of just what the heck are you building, right? One of the great experiences I've had is that I was on a team that was rebuilding a UI for a real estate website, right? And part of this real estate website was to try to keep people to actually go through and buy a house and be able to sell a house, and it was really in that real estate market, right? Well, come to find out, my development team who was in India and the design agency who was based in New York City, right? They came back with some initial designs, and I was like, man, this isn't very good, right? The UX sucks, and it just doesn't feel good. Then they come to find out, right? I just did a brief little survey, and nobody on the team had ever bought a house. So obviously, if you've never bought a house, you never actually sold a house, right? And so what really I found out, I was like, hey, you know what? Got to make sure that everybody who's actually building this stuff actually understands what the actual business problem is as well. So that's kind of the first tenet, at least in my head, right? Second one is having flexible Agile rituals, right? And when I say flexible Agile rituals, we've heard earlier about this idea of self-organizing teams. You can really say, however you want to kind of put it. We talked about, people wanting to define their own salaries, but essentially the team itself, at least in my opinion, really is going to determine what its success is. And me as a stakeholder, right? Me as kind of you can call me the guy who's really either writing the checks or just who's really banking on the success. I really don't care about how the team is organized. What I care about is results, right? So. I think that's one piece is being able to be flexible. The number 3 is really transparency, right? How do you make sure that everybody has access to data, right, or to the information that's going to make them successful, right? In the old days, right, when I was working for one of those large companies right there, what we used to do was you'd write a big, long-ass document, right? It'd be good 40 pages. Then you give it to your developers in India, you throw it over the wall and say, hey, guess what? I'm going to see you in 6 months, and it better work, right? If it doesn't work, then maybe in the contract we put penalties and things like that, right? But at the end of the day, right, it's their project, and me as the owner, I just, twiddle my thumbs and maybe check in, and then next thing you know, after 6 months, guess what? it doesn't work, and nobody's actually happy, right? So transparency is a really big thing. And then the last thing, which I think is really, really, really important to me, is this really idea of calling be allies and let's not turn people into mercenaries, right? And essentially it's how do you make sure that everybody who's on the team feels equal and they feel like they're actually are going to be fulfilled by the success of the project, right? And I think that's something that's really, really tough, especially as a lot of folks in here have, whether you have stakeholders or product owners or business executives who are in a different country or a different part of the world. Really, the real big thing is really how do you make sure that people are really invested in your success, right? Because as a stakeholder, I want people who are actually going to be invested in my success because I found that you're going to do that little extra thing, let's say at the end of the project, to make sure that that project launch goes successful. So, really the first kind of use case I want to tell you guys about is really one of my first experiences working with someone here in Sarajevo as well. So, am I pronouncing it right? Okay, so I thought someone was correcting my pronunciation. So we were trying to build a survey tool. Just show of hands, how many people have ever taken a survey? Like SurveyMonkey, Google Forms. Cool. So everybody knows how a survey works, right? So that's going to be key. We'll come back to that, right? So essentially, we had team members in Atlanta. We had a team member in Florida. We had a product owner who was in Atlanta. And of course, we had, I use the term Agile lead, but essentially we had our Scrum Master. And all of our team members were here in Bosnia, right? So Nermina was on that team. I'm not sure if anybody else is in here was on that team. So, but we were trying to build a survey tool, and the company that I worked for at the time built software for the radio industry. So it was, essentially, as much as I'd like to say how amazing of a product design, amazing of a business model I came up with, essentially it was just, a survey tool for the radio industry, right? But essentially, we were also going to use it for we're going to use our new technology stack, as well as the other big thing for us was we had to get it done in about 4 to 5 months, right? And the reason for that is that we were a small company. So we were a company that was only doing, let's say, $14 million in revenue per year, and we had a goal to try to get to 20 in the next fiscal year. So every little bit of money helped, and the client that we were building it for promised to pay us, let's just call it $500,000 bonus if we actually got the product out in time by the end of the year. So the other interesting thing about this is that this was the first time the company had ever used a company that was not, or really, actually, let me rephrase this. This was the first time the company had ever used an offshore team, right? Everybody, they had a really small dev shop. They were a really close-knit kind of group of people. And at some point, the owners of the company said, "Man, we need more resources. We can't hire anyone. And we got to move fast. What do we do?" And somehow, we got in touch with one of the business devs folks from Israel, and somehow they came in and were able to kind of get the contract, right? But the interesting thing about this was that while we did this and everybody saw the benefit of it, there were some people on the team who weren't really, when I say the people on the Atlanta team, who were not really thrilled about the idea of outsourcing work, right? And I'll be honest with you, right? There are still people like that today who don't love the idea of sending work thousands and thousands of miles away because we're Americans and we can get stuff done or whatever, right? So, anyways, long story short, we had 4 months, right? And we had a defined scope, we had a defined timeline, which I know a lot of folks who are real Agile purists really don't like the idea of timelines and deadlines. But that was really what we had to do. So just had a quick, without me going into details, anybody want to take a guess of whether we were successful or not? Who thinks we were successful? Ooh, pessimist. I love it. Cool. Well, we actually were successful, right? And we were successful for a few different reasons, right? I'm going to come back to this picture too. That's you. So one of the reasons that we were successful is that I like to say we turned mercenaries into allies. And we did that by making sure that every member of the team was invested in the success, right? And from an early part of the project, we realized that even when we looked at the velocity of where the team was going and Najad, who was our Scrum Master, and Nermina, and a couple of members was like, "Hey, look, even without bugs, I don't think we can make it," right? And at the end of the day, I was like, okay, well, I went and told my bosses, and I said, look, they're not sure that we can make it, and my bosses were like, well, they have to, right? We really need this. So one of the things that we actually did is we went and talked to the the company here, and we said, okay, how do we actually make sure that everyone's invested in the success, and how do we make sure that when it comes down to crunch time, that we're going to get this out, right? So we actually came up with a few things. We actually we actually built in an extra bonus for every team member to make sure that if we were out, we gave them, maybe you can call it a bribe, but we gave them a bonus. We actually funded, at least my company funded extra vacation days for the team. We really started to look and say, hey, how do we make sure that everybody in the team is really motivated to make sure that we as a company are going to be successful. So that was one thing, right? So the funny thing is, when I talk about making a success, we actually had one developer who was having just a ton of trouble on one little module, right? And that module was actually blocking other things from actually going live, and it was a real kind of real big pain and really big stress point, right? And at some point, I'm like, okay, look, we got to get some other guys, and maybe I can pull some guys from my Atlanta team. And the funny thing is, like, he contacted me on Skype independently and said, look, like, I can do this. Like, just trust me. I'm going to work all weekend to do this. And and I was like, look, you don't have to work all weekend. He's like, look, it became a matter of pride for him, right? Because all of his team members were kind of knocked out their stories, and he didn't want to be the guy who couldn't knock out his story, right? And so it was actually really, really touching for me. But he was also really invested in the success of our project. But he also didn't want to he wanted to show his team members that he was, of course, as good as they were as well. So long story short, he actually knocked it out that weekend as well, and it was a little buggy, but at the end of the day, right, we were successful, right? The other thing is that the team figured out the Agile rituals that they wanted to do. So the first thing we did is we said, look, we're going to have a stand-up at 9:30 Eastern, 9:30 Atlanta time, and we started that for the first few sprints, and we had the stand-up, and it went okay, but then we figured out a couple of things. One thing is that we had two team members that didn't speak English very well at all. So that kind of made the stand-ups on Skype not work out really well. The other thing is that by the time when the stand-up time came, we had people in Atlanta who were just walking into the office, and we had other, we kind of had some other things that were kind of going on that kind of made this time kind of a really distractful time. That's right, and the team lead, of course, was a team lead on two different teams in Atlanta, right? So he was there sometimes he wasn't, right? And at the end of the day, these guys came to me and said, hey, look, can we just have our own stand-up and then we just meet at the end of the day and just kind of like go over things? And I said, you know what? Like, just because we're here in Atlanta, and of course here in Sarajevo, we actually had our QA guys was there too. So at the end of the day, they came to me and said, look, we need a different way of working. The way we're working is not different. And can you, Jonathan, let go of control and let us freaking figure it out how to work it, right? And we said yes, and that was one thing that really helped. A, is save time, and B, is really help the team here actually kind of gel a little bit, because they weren't really they didn't have this anxiety of I think it's what would it be, like 3:30, 4 o'clock here, of this anxiety of like, crap, we have to stand up with the Americans, and it never goes well, and somebody's got to translate for these two guys, and at the end of the day, the team figured out how they wanted to work, and we as stakeholders were smart enough to let the team figure it out, right? Lastly is that, this is before, in the days before Slack too, so we had Skype. So we had this big Skype team of, 12, 14 people on it. And at the end of the day, myself, even my boss, who was one of the co-founders of the company, right, he made himself available for questions. Right, and that's one of the big things. So even this developer who didn't speak English very well, right, he had the ability to, whether it's through email, through Skype, to actually ask the CEO of our company a question, right? And that's one of the things that there was no views of hierarchy in this idea. The idea was just, boom, right? We're going to be successful as a group, right? Titles don't matter, right? And so that was kind of one of the things that made us successful. So come back to that picture. So let's talk about a second project, right? So that project's super successful. Everyone's really happy. The CEOs kind of get the bonus, and everybody's feeling really good, right? So we come back to the second time of the same time of the next year, right? And these guys have another great idea, but they said, hey, look, instead of 4 months, let's be smart. Let's do it. We'll give you guys 6 months, right? So almost the exact same development team. I myself moved on to a different role within the organization, so I was, a little involved, but, not completely involved. But we said, look, let's try to emulate that same success, right? But we're going to take some of this dev lead who, who was a little skeptical at the time. He kind of, sort of would come around, and we're going to try to figure this out, right? So same group of people. But we also hired a product owner here in Bosnia as well. So we said, hey, look, let's have the product owner here, and we'll have all the executives in Atlanta, and for the most part, we'll just kind of work it that way, right? But we're going to try to do the same thing. Team can self-determine, and at the end of the day, we're going to kind of keep it. We're going to keep it kind of fast and loose, and let's just kind of let the team figure out what success is and kind of move forward, right? So knowing that we had the exact same people. Actually, let me ask you this: who here actually worked on a radio station before? Raise your hand. You worked on a radio station? Cool. Awesome. Some guy one. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. So knowing that we had the exact same people, the exact same, flexibility, the kind of the exact same players, who here thinks that this project of building an industry-first tool of handling a radio station's finances, who thinks that project was successful? Anybody? So we had 11. Okay, great. Now we have more pessimism. So you're right. It wasn't a success, right? Because remember how I said we're going to keep it fast and loose? Well, nobody on the team actually had any freaking idea how the radio station actually worked, or how the finance would work. So we built user stories, right? But nobody understood what was actually behind those user stories, right? So essentially, what was happening is that every 2 weeks on these sprint reviews, right, you'd get the form would look good, and okay, that's great, and okay, look, it looks like progress is being made. But at the end of the day, right, like let's say you start trying to put the features together, and nothing actually worked as it did. Like it worked, the bugs weren't there, but it didn't actually solve the business problem that we were trying to get because nobody knew what the business problem was, right? Both from the Atlanta side, from the product, or at least from the executive side, they didn't do a great job of talking to our product owner here, and since the individual developers didn't understand the business as well, they were just writing code, right? It's just building forms, and yeah, it looks like the design, okay, cool, right? So long story short, this project was a huge failure, right? Because nobody understood what was actually being built, and no actual real business value was actually being created. Secondly, remember how I said that some people like myself had moved off the project, but we still had some dev leads there? Well, those dev leads came to view the success of this team here as maybe a little bit of a threat, right? And so they weren't as forthcoming with information, and they weren't as forthcoming with how they actually dealt with the team here. So things that were dependencies, things that, let's say that you would think that as a team member you should know about, they didn't exactly share very openly, right? So eventually, they kind of treated really the team here almost as second-class citizens. And that was one of the things that also led to the failure as well, because we had developers here who were afraid to ask questions, right? They were afraid to ask, what are we building here? Or I can't figure out what's actually, this isn't working, but I don't understand why this isn't working. And hey, look, this web service that I'm dependent on isn't happening. How do I, when's it going to be ready? It got to the point where the relationship was so hostile or so toxic that they didn't want to ask these questions as well. So at the end of the day, right, this project was a huge failure, and on the other piece of it too, if I had to say there was some fault on both sides, the other fault was that the contracting company here was, there were some things going back and forth, and they didn't feel very confident in saying, hey, look, this one dev lead or this one, architect, he's kind of holding things back from us, right? Because they were trying to save the entire contract, right? So long story short is, it's a two-way street, and this project was a huge failure because the lines of communication broke down, right? So let's move on. All right, so fast forward, different company. Here's the one great thing about the first experience I had was that as I moved on to a new company, myself and the CTO, who was my boss, said, hey, you know what? We had some really good success with the guys based out of here. Let's try to use them again, right? But also, we have some other firms that we're going to try to use. So let's try to use everybody else. So as you can see, we had a really distributed team. Right? We had guys in Atlanta, we had guys in Miami, and I used to love visiting Miami because it's a great city to go visit. We had people here in Sarajevo. We had a guy in Frankfurt. Actually, in that picture I showed you, he was one of those guys. So he was in Frankfurt. We had a whole team or a group of guys in Shanghai. We had a designer who was in Romania. And like I said, we have people in Miami as well. And the product owner was actually, we had one product owner who was in Miami, and kind of myself and a BA was actually in Atlanta as well. So we were going to revolutionize the way that people buy internet and home phones. I'm not sure how you guys buy internet and home phones here, but in the United States, it's a pseudo-competitive market, right? You have 3 options in your house, and essentially, depending on where exactly you live, is really how fast, and what kind of pricing and promotional promotions you're going to get, right? So we're going to create a new software platform on a new stack, right? Totally cutting-edge technology that's going to change the way, and our biggest client that we were going to sell this to, besides individual customers, was going to be Amazon as well. And that was the big whale for us, was can we sell this to Amazon and make a ton of money and maybe get bought by Amazon, right? That was our goal, right? But the beautiful thing about this is that, all of the APIs that went into making all this happen, to sell a cable or to sell a telephone company, they've already been established. They were old APIs, and there was documentation galore, and it felt really, really, you go through and you say, man, this thing, all we're going to do is just really slap on a new stack on an old problem, and we're going to own it, right? Who thinks we're successful? Yes, thank you. I love it. I love the optimism. We were not successful. We were not successful. So the first issue we had was that there were language barriers, right? And not everyone is going to know the great English language. However, we had a couple folks here in Bosnia, right? And most of them, they knew English fairly well. But then we had guys in Shanghai, and only one of them could speak English, right? So that's kind of one problem, right? And then we actually had a developer in Miami. And that developer in Miami, English was his second language, so he spoke with a thick accent. So at the end of the day, right, we had these stand-ups, and you had, I think it was around 20 people in a stand-up, so imagine how long that took, right? So you had a long stand-up, and people really couldn't understand what they were saying, but at the end of the day, right, we also had a new kind of program manager, and the program manager was like, listen, we need to have one team, right? You guys are building a product. If you're building a product, you all have to be the same team, right? It's your one stand-up, and you have one velocity, and that's how it works, right? Well, come to find out, he and she wouldn't allow the team to split up as well. So one of the ways that this whole project became a success was that we said, look, the Chinese team was supposed to build the integrations. Let's put them up into their own Agile team, right? Let them do however they want to work, they can work over there, right? Let's let the people working in the middleware, they're going to work this way, guys working in the front end, you guys split up. So instead of just having one huge stand-up, right, we let the team figure out and say, okay, look, split up, go do your own things. At the end of the day, we'll meet in the middle, and there'll be some collaboration at the architectural level. But let's not try to force, how this one or two, Agile practitioner thinks that we should be working. But let's let the team actually figure it out, right? So that was actually really helped those guys. But the other piece of it too is that remember talking about having an idea about what you're coding for. The guys in China, no clue, right? All they knew is that they were just trying to build these integrations, and they were knee deep into the APIs, and they poked their head up after a week or so, and can you guys test it? Can you test it, right? And it didn't really work very well. The other thing that was really important too is that, remember we talked about, I think Michael here kind of talked about continuous integration? Well, we were on 2-week sprints. And so what was happening at the end of the day was like literally, we took 3 days just to say, okay, we're going to merge the code so we can just do our sprint demo. So it would take the team 3 days just to merge the code, and it was a huge mess because they were all doing it in one little instance, and at the end of the day, nothing actually happened. And the other thing that was really frustrating is that then, we have the CEO of the company, the CTO of the company is asking me, saying, hey, look, why, we're spending all this money, right? Where's the value? What's actually being produced? Where are we at? Are we at 30%? Are we at 20%? Are we at 60%? I think that's the other thing to realize is that if you think about kind of how an executive works, or the executive mind, they don't care about if you're using Agile or if you're using Waterfall or whatnot, right? They like Agile because Agile gives them some visibility, right? And they also like it because at the end of the day, there's this thought that we can pivot, right? But in their hardest of hearts, what they're really still thinking of is the old school method of, are we 10% done, 20% done, or 50% done, right? And I think that one of the things that we learned also here is being able to quantify that in a non-agile method of saying, meh, yeah, we're 33%, we're 40% done, right? And in our heads, we know we still have this much of the backlog to go through and this much, but we also had to kind of dumb it down and say, look, to our executives, say, look, as we do a demo, right, our demo isn't necessarily going to be working as you would expect it to be working, but don't just trust us, but this is all that we've accomplished, and let me tell you why it's important, why we accomplished all this as well. So that was kind of one of the big things that we also learned was really kind of figuring out how you actually talk about your progress, as well as when you give a demo as well, making sure that the executives understood, okay, yeah, great, I see a bunch of code, but what exactly does that code actually mean from a business value standpoint, or what can I achieve with this code that I've done, right? Don't just build a PowerPoint presentation and say it's done. Don't just show, your integration environment that's really ugly, but give them actually break it down about what have you actually done as well. So, all right, last one, right? So, semi the same teams, right? We still have our designer in Romania, so let's fast forward a year, right? Designer in Romania, same folks in Miami, people in Atlanta, some guys here in Sarajevo as well, right? We're going to build a SaaS product that's going to be a reward platform for selling these same, kind of internet and cable concepts, right? Here's the one thing I want you to know: the product owner here is in Miami. Had never worked in Agile before. She was an old school waterfall person, and mounds and mounds of documentation, and that's kind of how she went into this. Who thinks this is a success or a failure? Success, I'm sorry. Who thinks it's a success? Yeah, you guys are getting the gist of how I'm setting these things up. Love it. Okay, so this was a success, right? So, even though this product owner was a old school waterfall person, the amount of documentation and the way that she presented to the dev team immediately understood what they were building. So they were on board, and they were ready to go, right? The other thing too is that the team also chose Kanban, right? That's how they wanted to work. And I went into it thinking that, okay, these guys are gonna probably gonna do a 2-week sprints and like everybody else does. And they said, no, we want to work Kanban, and it worked for them. Nobody cared, because at the end of the day, they didn't just actually roll code out successfully, but the roadmap, they were able to keep going on that roadmap, and long story short, that product was actually very wildly successful, both from a business standpoint as well as from a the transparency concept, which we as kind of business executives like, which is hey, I know how much this is going to cost me, and I have a general idea of where we can go in 6 months to 9 months based on the throughput that this team is giving me, right? So that project was a wild success because we let the team self-organize, everybody in the team understood, and also the other great thing about this team, and I'm going to wrap up really quickly, is that this team actually had that same openness as well, because we also introduced Slack at the same time, and we got our entire company in Atlanta onto Slack, and we had our developers here onto Slack. And at the end of the day, the developers would go and message the product owner, message the sales guy, ask the sales guy, hey, what do you think about this? Go check this out. What do you think, right? So the lines of communication were open, but it wasn't too, it wasn't really seen as being distractionary. And that was the other reason why it was successful, that the developers were actually able to take those original huge requirements, bring them down and talking to the sales team real time, and actually create value. And at the end of whether it's every day or every 3 weeks, depending on however much we actually release code out to production. So I actually, if you guys can't tell, I'm a talker, right? So I work for a German steel company now, and I'm not going to belabor all these points, but really we took the same concepts to heart now, right? From this is my team in Berlin. To create a high-level business understanding, we allow all of our developers to fly from, whether they're in Berlin, fly to Atlanta, or fly to wherever it is. We actually put them in front of customers so they can actually see where the customers, what are our customers doing, how do they actually use the tools, right? As well as everybody's on Slack, and we of course we don't just actually put user stories into our Confluence. We actually put our business strategy documents all the way up from the CEO, so that every developer understands what the heck are they actually building, right? Flexible Agile rituals. Team chose the LESS framework for scaled Agile. They chose it. We don't care, right? As long as they're successful, which they are, that's what they chose, right? Transparency, I talked about Slack. Every team member has access to everybody, right? As well as, talking about being allies and not being mercenaries, right? At the end of the day, once you reach the Agile team, your title doesn't matter, right? When it comes to actual things that the team's trying to accomplish. And that's the big thing that's really important for us is even if you're the CEO of the company or you're just, the junior QA guy, right? When you're either in that room or you're trying to solve a problem, nobody cares what your title is. Good ideas get followed, bad ideas get thrown to the side, right? And that's something that I'm actually really proud of that we've actually finally been able to implement because it's something that takes time and it takes a different mindset to throw away the ideas of title and whatnot to be able to move forward. Lastly, also, is that our employees are really highly motivated because they actually believe they're revolutionizing the steel industry, right? And there's been a little bit of propaganda to really help move that forward. But the other piece of it too is that as we've hired these kind of young millennials, right? They actually really believe in what they're building. So that's the other piece too. Is that if we talk about how to kind of move forward, is making sure as you're working with your stakeholders, how do you make sure that your teams are actually invested in the success of what they're building, and if they're not, then let's figure out ways that they can become invested in the success, right? Because that's how, that's how these guys are actually going to be. That's how I think is how your clients, at least from a business perspective, are going to want to stay with you, while also making sure that each of your employees are feeling fulfilled as they're actually building this code, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a tech industry, right? People can actually move to different companies, and it's a very good market. So the key is to make sure that people are feeling fulfilled as what they're doing, and people don't feel fulfilled when they're being talked down to, right? And that's the key for us as stakeholders, as well as for if you're the manager of a company, as well as making sure that your employees feel like they're equals with their partners on the other side of the pond, or on the other side of Europe, or just down the hall. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.